Hi guys, welcome to my channel Lush Gardener. I hope you guys are fine and are safe. So guys, today we'll be discussing about the myths surrounding adding of fertilizers to your succulents. Because a lot of people have certain misconceptions when it comes to adding fertilizers to your succulents. So we will be talking about that one by one. So a lot of people tend to ask me what fertilizers are good for succulents. Now guys, adding a fertilizer is not necessary. As you can see, these are my succulents. I do not add any fertilizers to them. If you do not add any fertilizers, the succulent will do absolutely fine. But if you're going to add a little bit of fertilizers, there is not much harm. You can always do it during the growing season and always ensure that you dilute it. It's always better to use a liquid based fertilizer. Another frequently asked question is what kind of fertilizers I can use for my succulents so that they start growing faster and bigger. Now guys, remember, succulents will grow at their own pace whether you add fertilizers or you do not add fertilizers. Now if you have a misconception or if you're thinking that by adding too much of fertilizers will make your succulents grow bigger and faster, then you're completely wrong, because that's not going to happen. Because when we tend to use our fertilizers, we only use fertilizers once a month or once in 2 months during their growing period. Now this amount of fertilizer will not make your succulents grow faster. In fact, the urge of growing bigger and faster succulents might be a disadvantage to you because it is going to work in reverse. In fact, adding too much of fertilizers will pollute the soil with excess nutrients, and that in return will harm your succulents. It will make your succulent very weak. Now guys, you need to understand over here, when you tend to add too much of fertilizers or nutrients in the soil, it's not that your succulent will start showing up signs within a day or within 2 days, or even for that matter a week or a month. This is a long process. It works as a slow poison. So even after adding too much of nutrients, it's not necessary that your succulent will immediately start to die. It usually takes around 3 months to 6 months, and that's when the succulent starts to show signs of weakness and it slowly starts to get rotted or it starts to collapse. So guys, please avoid putting in too much of fertilizers. Don't have a misconception that by adding too much of fertilizers you will be able to grow your succulents bigger. Another important thing that you need to realize, guys, not all the succulents are going to grow huge. There are only certain varieties or species of succulents, like you have your Mexican giant or you have Fred Ives. There are some more of these varieties that tend to grow slightly bigger or they tend to grow huge. But it's not necessary that all the varieties of your succulents will grow huge, because a lot of times we think that probably this succulent will grow huge once I start adding in fertilizers, or probably once I put it in ground and I start growing it, probably it will start getting huge. But that definitely will not work, because there are certain varieties of Echeverias that tend to grow really huge. At the same time, there are certain varieties of Echeverias that won't even reach to a size of 10 centimeters. So it completely depends upon the species, the variety of the succulent or the genus of the succulent, because a lot of succulents will definitely not grow that huge. Now guys, another important thing what I've also noticed and what people tend to ask me is, how do I tend to get these beautiful colors on my succulents, and what is the fertilizer that I tend to use? Now guys, please, you need to understand, fertilizers and getting colors on your succulents are two opposite poles. I know these people, they tend to do these advertisements wherein they have these packets of fertilizers which have these beautiful bright colored succulents on them. So you need to understand that these are just to attract you. These packets are designed in such a way to make it look very attractive, but you need to understand adding of fertilizers will not give you the bright color, because these colors appear on succulents when they are stressed. Now if you are going to add fertilizers or nutrients to your succulents, forget about them getting even the slightest color. They will start reverting back to green color, because when you tend to add fertilizers to a succulent, especially during the growing period, the succulent is already losing the color because it's in its growing period. So basically the succulent is going to be happy because it is getting some food and there is nutrients in the soil, so it is going to revert back to green in color. Now guys, if you want those bright colors on your succulents, then you have to stress your succulents. Now for beginners, I usually advise you not to stress your succulents. You let them do their natural thing, because when the succulents tend to hit the dormancy, they naturally get these bright colors. 80% of the colors come by nature. You do not need to do anything, because during dormancy, as you all know, we tend to cut down on the watering. All we need to do is just give them a little bit more of direct morning sunlight in order to get that intense light. But otherwise, please do not add any fertilizers, because obviously we do not add fertilizers when a succulent is in its dormant stage. So the only thing that you have to do is cut down on the water, give it a little bit more of sunlight so that the stress colors can be visible. Remember, adding of fertilizers will not give you that bright color. It is the stress that tends to get the colors on your succulent. Another important thing, this is what a lot of people tend to ask me: can we keep our succulents colored throughout the year? Now guys, it is possible to stress your succulents throughout the year, but it can be very risky, because obviously our seasons tend to change, our climate tends to change. But if you belong to a place wherein your temperature is cool throughout the year, then you can definitely stress your succulents throughout the year. But there is one disadvantage, and that is your succulents are not going to grow fast. They are going to stay small for a really long time. The reason is because you are stressing them. When you tend to stress your succulents, you're basically cutting down on the water, you are not adding any fertilizers, and you're giving them more amount of sun. So what's going to happen over here is, even during the growing period, you are stressing them, which means that it won't be able to grow. So even though your succulent will be stressed, but there won't be any good amount of growth. First of all, our succulents are very slow growing. So you can imagine over that you are going to further slow their growth. So again, it completely depends upon you whether you want to have a good healthy growing succulent, or you want to have a succulent that is perfectly stressed, but there is hardly or very minimum growth on your succulent. This completely depends upon you. So there is another thing which I have noticed, and I have watched so many videos on YouTube and have seen a lot of people, when they tend to make their DIY potting mix at home, they also tend to use a lot of fertilizers. Especially when you are repotting a new succulent, you should not add fertilizers at the same time. You have to wait at least a month before you add any fertilizers. So you basically need to let the succulent get adjusted in the new soil. Wait for a month. If it's the growing season, you can add fertilizers. So these were the very few misconceptions related with fertilizers. So don't think that by adding fertilizers you are going to get that vibrant color. Don't think that by adding fertilizers or by adding too much of fertilizers you will be able to grow your succulents bigger, because over the period of time your succulent will get weak if there is excess nutrients in the soil. So guys, at the end of the day, it completely depends upon you whether you want to use fertilizers or you do not want to use fertilizers. But if you tend to use, ensure that you do it either once a month or probably once in 2 months. Do not add too much of fertilizers, because if the fertilizers are too high in the soil, it might even burn the succulent roots. Especially if the nitrogen levels are very high in the fertilizer, it will definitely burn your succulents. So you have to be very careful when working with fertilizers for your succulents. So guys, I hope that this video was helpful to you. If it was, please hit the like button. If you're new to my channel, please consider subscribing to it. Until then, take care, stay safe, and keep propagating.